Hello, and we are back, and we left off right around Exodus 15 with the song and psalm. Or remember the word psalm, depending on which translation you have. Psalm just means song in Hebrew. It's the same word, okay? Of Moses, and they sung and danced, and then they go into the verse 22. They start going into the wilderness of Shur, and 3 days in, they got no water. And it only takes 3 days, and of course now they're ready to stone Moses, and they're going crazy. How could you bring us here, right? You brought us out here to kill us. It would have been better for us to go back to Egypt and be slaves than to be here. Now, of course, you're thinking, oh, how could they do that? And of course, you know, from what they've seen. Now, the one major thing you have to get, which we many times have the wrong focus here. We miss a key point of the story, which is we are looking at it with hindsight, knowing that the Lord has good, loving intentions. Right? Yeah. Sometimes we question whether they believe in Him. Well, that's not the point. There's not a time where they don't. It's not like they're not looking at the cloud of fire and the other cloud and looking at the manna every morning and all this stuff and not believing in Him. What they're doing is questioning His motives, questioning His integrity, questioning His desire. Because sometimes you'll be like, I remember as a kid, how could they not believe? Because I only understood believe in God or not believe in God. That's all I understand as a kid, growing up in church. Well, it's not a question of whether they're not believing, right? It's a question of what is His, because did He bring us out here so He could slaughter us? Yeah. See, the thing is, they're questioning His motives, they're questioning His power, like what His plans to do. They're questioning, is He all-knowing and all in control? Or all of those things are the things that they're constantly questioning. See, one of the major things, and it really hits very soon, is the key part of the whole thing is when the Lord wants to speak to them directly, and then they tell Moses, you talk to the Lord, we can't. Because they're afraid. They're afraid of Him. And not in the honoring fear, but in the questioning Him. Right? And that's what's happening right now. So I know, you can probably pick that out. But I remember, always kind of having to separate that too. It's not a question of whether they don't believe in Him. What they struggle with is believing that His intentions are to love them and care for them. Right? See, because we're coming from hindsight, we know God is love, we know He gave His Son for us, right? So God so loved the world. We get all that, so we look back at this and wonder why they're having such a hard time. Remember, they just spent 400 years as slaves. Right? So they don't exactly have the same understanding and see it the same way we do. Right? And their understanding is, well, first of all, then why didn't He get us earlier? Why did He let us be there? Why did He let us go through this? Right? So, they haven't gotten that His intentions are love for them. And that's something you have to keep in mind, because we'll constantly judge them for that. Right? And think, well, because we're coming from hindsight where we understand His intentions. We know, but they didn't. Many of them didn't. Right? He's revealing Himself to them now. And at Sinai, He reveals Himself to them as a God of love. But yet, also a God of justice for those who hate Him. Right? Mm-hmm. But all those things were being revealed then. All right, so anyway, that's just something to keep in mind as we go through. So, I left off with this question. Why do you think, just want you to think about it for a second, did the Lord let them sweat? Could He have given them water right away? Did He know that they needed water? What is the first thing if you're on a journey in the desert? What is the first and most important thing? Water, right? Well, the Lord made them wait a little bit, didn't He?
About as long as they could, actually.
About as long as they could. And He pushed them to their limit, didn't He? Now, the question, you can't skip this question. A lot of people do, because it's, what does it mean? So they just skip it and don't ever get into it. But the Lord purposely wanted to test them with this. And of course, Meribah means the waters of testing. And that comes up in the New Testament as well. You know, in Hebrews, the water of Meribah, the time of testing where you tried me. Okay, and that comes back to this story. And so, now, why did the Lord do this? He wanted to see whether they would believe of all the other times. He's done all these miracles for them. Would they really expect him to do and to take care of them or not? And of course, many of them did not. Many of them now started to wonder whether the whole plan was to get him out here so that he could kill them. Right? Or maybe he didn't, maybe he didn't want to help them. Or maybe he didn't care. Right? You understand? These are a lot of the things that they're thinking. But you may think if you were there, you'd have done differently, but try 3 days in the desert without water. It isn't easy. All right? You wouldn't be feeling very good. Your little, my little back pain or whatever knee problem you have or whatever, it pales in comparison. Okay? So you have to keep that in mind. But the point remains, the Lord is after their heart. The Lord wants to see whether they'll choose him. The Lord is looking for them to turn towards him and call out for him. Right? That's what he wants. He doesn't want them to say, let's go back to Egypt. He wants them to cry out, Lord, give us water. He wants them to turn as children to their Father. You understand? That's what he wants.
That's what he wants from us now.
Yes. But see, they're doing the opposite. They're going the opposite way. So verse 23 of 15. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. So the people grumbled of Moses and said, so they finally get to water, and the water's bitter, and they can't drink it. All right? What shall we drink? Then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. Then he made for them a statute of regulation, and here he tested them. And that's why Meribah is called the waters of testing. They finally get to water, and it's water that they can't drink that would kill them. Think about that. Verse 26, and he said, if you will give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer. Now, I can't skip that one because this one is extremely theological. Did the Lord just say that diseases that they knew in Egypt were put on them by the Lord?
Yeah.
Yes. Now, I want you to see how foundational that is. I've said this before. I told you I am going to over and over and over and over and over and over again point out to you the flaws in much healing theology that's being preached nowadays. All right? Which is, takes sovereignty out of it, that God has nothing to do with sickness, and God does not give sickness and can't give sickness to anyone, and they'll say God can't give what he doesn't have, blah, blah, blah. That's the common term. And it's all over the place, except for anyone who picks up the Bible and reads it, finds out over and over. And how many times already have I brought this up? Like 10? There's 100 more coming. So I need you to see how horrible and off that theology is. It's a slander on God. All right? Who puts it? Who is in control of disease?
God.
God. Disease is a part of this sinful world. And it's something here. Now, the Lord can free us from disease, can he?
Yes.
Can he heal us? He said, because he's the one that heals them. Right? But he also is telling them that there is healing that will be part of their inheritance for obedience. Okay? And but he's also, the theological point is that the Lord is, again, ultimately responsible and in control for these things. Now, again, you have to apply the teaching of Job. And what is that? The Lord has allowed this to happen, therefore, the Lord willed it. Right? Does not mean that the Lord himself said, okay, I want you to be sick today. I want you to get this disease. You're going to have cancer, and that's what I planned on for you. It doesn't mean that, okay? But the mindset is, and the theology is, the Lord has allowed this to happen, right?
Yeah.
There's sickness and disease in the world, and he allowed you to get it, didn't he? Doesn't mean he purposed for you to have it, which is the ordained will of God. We already went over this, so now I'm hoping that you remember it, because I need to constantly come back to it, and now we built that foundation, right? We have the ordained will of God, right? Which is the planned, predestined will of God. And then we have, right, the, now I'm forgetting the right term I used. The permissive will of God. Thank you. Right? Which means the Lord did not intervene and stop it. Therefore, God is ultimately the one responsible. Isn't that true? All right, so has everybody got this now? So I don't have to go through it all again. But you see how this is an important part. I told you that we're building and we're establishing groundwork here. This is a major thing that you need to get. And you're going to find it over and over again. Okay? And here's another place. Now, one thing you have to realize, that there are now these 40 years in the desert, they don't have sickness, they don't have disease. Their shoes do not wear out. Their clothes doesn't wear out. They have supernatural food every morning. They're led by a pillar of a fire. Okay, you understand? So the supernatural is everywhere. But yet, the Lord tells them here that they had diseases in Egypt. They were used to disease and sickness in Egypt. He will keep them from it while they're obedient. Okay? But also, clearly the point here is that if they are not obedient and turn and rebel, diseases will come back. Right? Yes. Now, some people would try to apply that to, are Christians then supposed to not have any sickness or disease? No. First of all, that's replacement theology. That's you claiming this is part of the 40 years in the desert. Okay? There was lots of sickness and disease in the New Testament. All right? The point is that through faith in God, we can overcome disease and sickness. Right? But it will touch us all at some point. Right? Anyway, that is something, though, that comes up a lot, and why I harp on it and why I bring it up, because I don't want you just to take my opinion. I don't want you just to believe what I believe on these things. That's not the point of this class. Right? The point of the class is for you to see it for yourself. So when you hear this teaching, no sickness can come from God, God can't give what he doesn't have, and all this stuff. When you hear that whole thing, you'll very quickly see through it and know, well, that's not scriptural. Right? So anyway, that's why I do that. And so that you can see it for yourself. Okay. Anyway, but also you see here that it's a promise. The Lord right off the bat is giving them a promise that he will keep them from sickness and disease through obedience. Okay. Anyway, so let's move on. 16. Now, of course, that brings us to, what is it? What is it? Is manna. And manna means bread from heaven. But at first they said, what is it? Okay? Because it's not anything that really they understand. It's like bread, but it's not bread. It's like just some out of this world kind of, meal is what it is. All right? Now, of course, bread from heaven is incredible significance. Manna, we think of the Lord's Prayer. The Lord did not speak Greek or English. give us today our daily bread, actually the Lord would have said, give us today our manna. Sending us back to this story of believing God will provide in the morning. Right? Everybody understand that? And Jesus, of course, was the bread of life, the bread from heaven. Right? All of it has significance. But here's another story. Here's another thing. Why didn't the manna start falling the first day?
Because we've got 30 days without food.
Right? Think about it. 3 days for water. Then it was like a month. And then the manna starts. Couldn't it have all come in the beginning and they wouldn't have suffered at all? I just want you to see it. The Lord's after their heart. Everything is about their heart. And some of them had the right heart, as we'll see. But it also separates the ones who don't. And the ones who are selfish. And all those things are being separated. And the best way to test people for real is obviously through food. We all think we're very self-controlled and but try to starve for a couple weeks. Right? We all may think we're very full of faith and try to starve. And you'll find out how full of faith you are. And most of us will fail the test very quickly. Okay? So, truthfully though, the Lord was after their heart here, for them to turn to Him. Right? That's the whole point of it. And to show them, to let them feel a little bit of need, what it's like to be without Him. That's also part of it as well. Okay? To feel that wow, this is without Him, we have no bread. With Him, we have bread, and we have water, and we have health. Right? There's a contrast here that was supposed to be made as well. All right? And of course, that He sees to their needs. So, now we have manna. But I always think it's interesting that the water comes first, then they got to wait a while. You think, okay, fine, I'm just going to set up that whole food and water thing now, and we'll get a nice little thing going. No, we'll give you water now because you have to have water. We'll wait a little while longer. Now you have to have, now we'll give you food because you have to have food. Right? So anyway, verse 4, 16 verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instruction. Now that is something to circle and underline. That's why I always make sure I read that verse, because it tells you exactly why. I wasn't making this up. The Lord is testing them. The Lord is after their heart. Even the way He has the manna coming is to test them. Could the Lord have just miraculously let a bunch all of a sudden have just had oats and barley just start to grow in the desert?
Yeah.
Of course. Couldn't that have happened?
Yeah.
I mean, He sent quail. He didn't send supernatural meat. He just blew in a wind and sent billions of quail. And they couldn't think there could possibly be enough. And the Lord said, yeah, let me tell you how much quail I can send you. Right? But the manna, I was thinking, well, Lord, you could have just, given them just a way to farm. You could have just given them seeds that will work in the desert. You could have just supernaturally made the sprouts come up. No, He gave them something outside of this world that had to be gathered every day and would only last one day. And He just told us why. Why? To test them. Right? Whether or not they will walk in my instruction. And whether or not they will trust me daily for their provision. That's what it's all about. Trusting Him. See, if He gave them a way to farm, they would rely on themselves. Isn't that true? They would then get good at it. They would know what they're doing. That happens quick. The Lord blesses us, then we get thinking we know what we're doing, and then within a couple of months, we know how to work this thing, we know what to do.
Amen.
And we're not relying on God anymore. Isn't that true?
Yep.
All right?
It would have only taken them a week to walk them across the desert.
They could have been right there. Remember, the other thing too is, we're going to get there in the story, but I probably should just set this up now, because it can get a little confusing if you've read portions before. One thing you have to remember is that it is not chronological with Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Leviticus is not storyline, Leviticus is law. Okay? But the storyline between Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy is not all chronological. Especially with Exodus and Numbers. They were written around the same time. Okay? Leviticus, as I told you, is written for a completely separate purpose. It doesn't have a lot of storyline. It has a couple of bits and pieces of storyline that specifically have to do with the Levites and the priesthood. Right? So there is some storyline in it, but it's just portions and that goes for specifics when it comes to the law and comes to establishment of the priesthood and those kind of things. So there is some storyline in it. Okay? But there's a lot of storyline in Numbers, which is a recalculation, an overview of the people groups, the family groups, and then the main stories, right? And then Deuteronomy deals with the end part, but has an overviews and recaps as well. Now, why I say that is because there's 2 different times the manna comes, and there's 2 different times the quail comes. And you're wondering, doesn't this already happen? And what's going on? So then you go to Numbers and you're freaking out because you're thinking, oh, all this happened again, and then more, and Meribah. And it doesn't follow a chronological order because you kind of think, oh, Leviticus, fine, we know that's law, has some story, but then we go to Numbers and now it's going to continue the story. Well, actually, a lot of them overlap. Okay, it's kind of like the Gospels. All right, of course, the new believer picks up the Bible and you tell them to, usually tell them, as I was always trained, tell them to read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts, and then go to Genesis. Right? But the point is that you have to explain to them, if you give a person a Bible and you tell them to read, you have to explain to them that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all a different account of Jesus' life, and that's why there's overlap, and that's why there's all this other stuff, because if a person doesn't have that, they're going to go, what the heck is going on? Right? Well, it's the same here. It's the same here, and so you don't get confused. And trust me, if you didn't know this bit of information, if you go through all the way through it, you'll start at one point go, wow, didn't we ever go through this? And when does this fit in the timeline? I thought we were here, but now we're back to manna, right? So anyway, there's overlap, and they're meant to be, they have a different purpose of why they were written, all right? And it's not all a chronological story. And it zooms in on this highlight and this story, but then this, and here in Numbers, it gives us more detail that we didn't get in Exodus. Does everybody get that? Just kind of how the Gospels work, the same way. All right? So anyway, just so you get that, so when you're going through Numbers and stuff, you're not freaking out about it. Because the manna seems to come here, and then the quail are like close to each other. But then when we get to Numbers, you're going to see we get a lot more detail into how the whole thing worked out, which we don't get here. And we get the whole thing about it coming out of the nostrils and the complaining, we're sick of this manna, we want some meat to eat, and then but here it kind of seems like all one event. All right? So anyway, I'm just explaining that to you now. Now, as we go through, I'm going to fill in some parts from some of the other ones in here. All right? But first it starts with manna. Manna means bread from heaven. Like I said, the Lord could have given them, or he could have just given them enough for the whole week. You know, here's just bushels of manna, and just pack it up and make drawers for it in your tents and just carry it with you. You know, you could go out on a trip and you could have lots of manna. And well, see, no, it was all designed, again, to go after their heart. They have to gather it every day. And of course, they have a command. The Lord says to see if to follow my commands. What's the command? You only get enough for one day. You have to take whatever you need for that specific day. You cannot keep it. So, of course, some of them don't listen. They keep it overnight, and it spoils and immediately turns to worms and spoils. All right? And then Moses, it says Moses was very angry with them because he specifically told them that. Except for then, one day, it miraculously lasts perfectly for 2 days. So on Friday morning, I'm just converting it to our days, right? On Friday morning, which is, because anyway, you understand. That's why I'm doing it, so you'll understand. Friday morning, they would have to gather enough for 2 days. Because on Saturday morning, the Sabbath, there's no gathering. And they have to have manna enough for 2. I mean, only those times. And what is that all about? It's all about obedience. You know, the Lord cares about obedience. To obey is better than sacrifice. To obey is better than worship. Obedience. Right? And of course that comes from Samuel speaking to Saul. He was trying to give these great offerings, you know, and do this stuff for the Lord, but you should have just obeyed God. He prefers that over anything. Right? Obedience. So, of course, what is this all designed around? It's designed around to see whether they're actually just going to follow his ways. Do what he says. And he wants them to live this 40 years trusting every morning that the manna will appear.
So this is like pre-law, pre-Sabbath, so they're not keeping a Sabbath day yet. This is the...
Well, no, the Sabbath...
First hint of the Sabbath right now?
Well, it's starting to come all now.
Right.
The Lord has given them through Moses. He doesn't get the 10 Commandments and the full... It's all starting to come immediately as he starts to go through. Right. All right, now here, the Sabbath is installed. Okay, and 6 days. And part of this is to teach him it. See, part of this whole thing right now with the manna is to teach them about the Sabbath.
Right.
That's already really introducing following it. Now, there's been an understanding through the people of God for 6 day, 7 day rest from Abraham passed down from Noah.
Right. Sure.
Right?
That's
But the point here, though, is that this is already introducing them and starting the Sabbath. For I made the 7th day, the 6 days the Lord created the earth. And of course we get it again here in Exodus. 6 specific Hebrew days, 24-hour days. There's no way around it. It says it clearly. You have to just ignore it, which is of course what they do. Mm-hmm. But Moses, for some reason, says here in Exodus, not him writing about ancient history, but here in Exodus, he seems to have this idea that the Lord Yahweh created the earth in 6 literal 24-hour days and then rested on the 7th. So I told you that in Genesis that it's here. Well, it is here. You read it. Mm-hmm. All right? And there's zero wiggle room. But anyway, I've already gone through all that. But I just want you to see that that's here. But 6 day, 7 day rest was established from the beginning. But now, even through the manna, the Lord is using that as a way now to establish it. Right? And then, of course, when in the book of Leviticus, we get a very detailed description of how all this works. Okay? Now, one thing, again, too, is you kind of think that Exodus was written and then Leviticus comes after it. No, that's not how it works. Leviticus was being written right from Sinai. Okay? So there's overlap. There's a lot of overlap. All right? But the Sabbath is being established, and of course the manna is part of teaching that. The only one thing they are allowed to do on the Sabbath is cook. They're allowed to cook. The Lord likes cooking. So you're allowed to cook on the Sabbath and make a great meal. All right? Which, of course, what they do. They still do that in Israel today. They go all out and cook a big meal on Sabbath. All right? So anyway, of course, that's a teaching tool. And the other thing about it, of course, we're going to spend more time on it when we get to Leviticus on the Sabbath. But you have to remember, what is it all about? One of the number one things about it is teaching 6 day, 7 day rest, and teaching the Lord created the earth in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. It preaches creation, and it preaches the end of the age. It preaches it all in one. Okay? So that's how important it is. All right. And not to mention it's practical because men need a day off. In an agricultural society, they don't take a day off. Only in Israel they did. If you've been around a farming culture, men don't take days off. They do not. Only Israeli men, because they have to. That's it. Israeli farmers do take a day off, because they have to. All right? And they have to schedule everything to work around that. Now, they're not allowed to not feed their animal, because Jesus even said, on the Sabbath, won't you go out and save your ox and fall into a pit? Right? So when the religious ones who were abusing the law were the ones who were saying you have to let the ox die and not save it. Right? Because Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Right? That's Jesus' teaching, because they were abusing it. But the point is, though, that farmers were supposed to take the day off, 1 day off a week. Now for us, 1 day off a week is like, oh, we're used to 2 days off a week. Well, anyway, if you've been in an agricultural society, there is no such thing as a day off. They don't take them. They take out maybe an hour or two to go to church, and that's it. They're right back at it. Okay? So, anyway, so God obviously installed a day off as well, a day of rest to be with the Lord and with your family, and that's what we're supposed to glean from the Sabbath. Okay? Anyway, anyway, I'm jumping the gun on that because we're going to go through all of that again in Leviticus, and it's going to be detailed. I'm trying to stick more to storyline now. So, the manna, verse 15, 16:15, just to go over what they said. When the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather it every man as much as he should eat, and you shall take an omer, a piece according to the number of persons, each in his tent." And the sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much, and some gathered little, but they all had enough, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, verse 20 tells us some didn't listen and spoiled, and then you have the Sabbath really being instituted and backed up by this, right? And so it's already being introduced as part of their culture. And of course, that goes to verse 26, again, 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. And it came about on the seventh day that some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. And probably freaked out. It didn't come today, right? Because they didn't listen. Okay, so moving on. And when Jesus said, "I am the bread from heaven," you know what he said? That he is the manna from heaven. That's what he said. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Okay, so that brings us to chapter 17. Now this one, okay, is... now if you look on page 14 in the notes, you see the split rock. Guess what? It's real. That's a real picture. It's there. It is absolutely there. In this picture, you know, it's a little tough because you don't get how big it is. There's another picture with the guy standing in it. And this thing is like 100 feet tall. Guy is a little tiny grasshopper in it. Okay? It's right there by the Black Mountain. There was this humongous, you can see it from everywhere, from a mile away, rock that is perfectly split all the way down the middle symmetrically. And of course, underneath it, there's this huge, what looks like a basin with that easily looked like it could have been filled with water at some time. In the middle of the desert. It's there. Okay? That's a picture of it. There's better pictures of it, which I can hook you up with. All right? It's pretty awesome. And it's outside of right where Sinai is, but it's right next to it. It's okay? It's on the way. And close. Anyway, it's awesome that we have a picture. Now, in your mind, if you're immediately saying, "How could that possibly be?" That's probably a stretch. But I'll give you some there. But no, it is. It absolutely and totally is there. It's real. So at this point, you're saying, "I've been coming to church for a couple of years now, and you're telling me this is all fact and it's real. I might be looking to go somewhere else." Well, that's fine. You hung in there this long. But yes, it is real. And if you look into it and do your homework, you'll find out that it is, and it's true. And then you're wondering, well, how come the world doesn't believe? Because they don't want to. How come it's in public knowledge? Because they don't want it to be. You understand? That's the only reason. And of course, we have the Black Mountain as well. If you flip the page, you're going to see, if you're black and white picture, you probably don't see it well. Because it's black and white, it's hard to see a Black Mountain in a black and white picture. But there's a whole mountain on top of, what is something, Nublar, I forget exactly the name. You'll see that it's this big, huge mountain top, sharp, and the entire top of it is black and scorched. And if you dig it up underneath it, it's irregular underneath. The whole top is black. All right? It's awesome. Anyway, like I said, if you're sitting there doubting, it's okay, but trust me, this is real. But do your homework, don't just dismiss it. All right? And of course, the people that are watching this on video, which there's a number of you, do the same. And then you're going to wonder, well, how come the government isn't? How come the professors and well, you can find it yourself. Just Google can be meant for evil, but it also can do good.
Amen.
Okay? Any tool can be used for good or evil, can it?
Yes.
A hammer can be built used to build, and it also can be used to kill.
Okay.
Okay?
So it can be plowshares.
Yes. So there you go. But the point is, you can find all of this. You can actually go on Google Earth and look down at it. My dad did it and showed me it right on his iPad like last year. I was like, oh, that's awesome. Maybe that was 2 years ago. Anyway. So the rock is there now. It's cool to see the picture. Now, this is one of the stories, though, that kind of screws you up when it comes to timeline. Because when you're going through this, this all of a sudden comes up in Numbers, but you're not sure you're in the same place, and there's a lot more detail to it. And then you get the whole thing with Moses, getting angry with the people and hitting the rock, but striking it twice. And he said, "Speak to the rock," and blah blah blah, right? And then him and Aaron can't go into the land. And you're wondering, well, that's like a completely separate time, but no, it's actually the same time. They would just get more detail then, because this is an overview. And anyway, so that's why I'm telling you that now, so you'll be able to put it together. It's not all chronological. Anyway, so the people again, when you're traveling, you need more than one water source, right? So they run out of water again. And they're freaking out, and they're upset, and they're turning to the people again. And we know from, I believe in Numbers, it's, they're about to stone him. They got so upset they were about to stone him. And Moses cries out to the Lord, "They're going to stone me for this." And of course, that's why he was angry, and he took it out on them. One time, he lost his cool with them. Once. Now, when it comes to when he smashes the golden idol and grinds it into powder and makes them drink it, that was him teaching them a lesson. All right? And keeping the fury of God away from them. Which is one of the coolest stories, I think. All right? Anyway, but this is the same story as that one, even though we got a lot more detail on it later. All right? And of course, the rock splits open, this incredible rock, and shoots out. And it's not like you're thinking like a little trickle of stream, a little water comes out. No, this is enough for 1 million people to live off of.
Right.
In the desert. Okay? When out of it comes this massive, you could say, lake of fresh water. All right? That they live off of. Pretty awesome. In the middle of the desert, by the way. So, that is an awesome story, and the Lord provides water, and that's, of course, called the rock at Horeb. Okay, and of course, these names are important because they're used prophetically all through Scripture. Like I've told you before, the prophets used the language of Israel's history as their language. And many times these, like the waters of Meribah, or like the rock at Horeb, and all this kind of stuff they use, and the manna, and, the atonement, and the Passover lamb, and all these things are the imagery of the prophets, and if you don't know the imagery, you won't get it. Okay? So that's why all these stories are reiterated many other times in Scripture, and you're supposed to get the reference. So when you hear the rock at Horeb, or the split rock, or water from the rock, you're supposed to remember this story. When you hear about bread from heaven, you're supposed to think about the manna appearing every morning, and then trusting God for it. Right? All of those things are supposed to, so you get the imagery. Okay. So, that was chapter 17. All right, we're moving along here. We're moving. Slow but sure. And then after this, they're attacked. Now, as they're traveling, Amalek. Okay, now they're not in Amalek's land. They're in the middle of the desert. They're in the wilderness. This is no one's land. No one would have this as land. That's the one reason why they're there. Right? And that's one of the reasons why they're in the desert, because no one wants the desert. You don't have to fight for an opposing people for it. If it was a nice, plush land for them to be in, guess what? There would be an opposing army, wouldn't there? No one wants the wilderness. So anyway, but the Amalek comes out, Amalek raiders, and they don't, as an army, try to attack them. What they do is they start taking towards the back and picking off people, like a lion would do to a pack of gazelle. picking off the weak ones and picking them off here and there, and just stealing and taking them, and, you know, but not a standing army and confronting them. So of course the Lord, and I love this, how you have no idea who's like, you know, who's the leader of the army. You don't have any idea who's going to fight. Or they were slaves, right? The Lord just says to Moses, says, go, Joshua, go fight them. That's all we get. Like, we don't have, like, why Joshua? And of course, Moses was not the one fighting. Joshua was.
Yeah.
But Joshua was just chosen to be the leader right off the bat. And he commands Israel's army until he dies. All right, so obviously, and Joshua fought himself because later on he's a commander, but here he's fighting with his bare hands here. All right? And anyway, what's interesting is they're not soldiers. You have to remember, they have not been trained. They were slaves. They didn't want them to be trained. The last thing you want to do is train slaves how to fight. All right, it's a bad idea. They learn how to work. They know how to build things. That they're good at. Right? They're good with their hands, but they're not soldiers. But the Lord, you know, Moses says, tell Joshua was picked, go fight them. Imagine, but you have to think about that, though. I know we never think about, well, the Lord is with them. What do they have to be afraid for? They've never fought before.
Right.
You know, even a soldier gets some training before he goes into battle. Right? Isn't that true? Imagine you just never having any training a day and go fight a war. You understand? It's a little different, isn't it? Anyway, they go and fight, and Moses... Now, here's something I'm going to tell you to pay attention to. Why did they have to fight? And Moses had to hold the staff up. Couldn't the Lord just have let him know his arms are tired, you know? Couldn't the Lord just said, oh, well, I know, Moses, your arms will get tired after a while. Just hold on the staff like this, you know. I can't expect you to hold the staff in the air for 20 hours, you know.
He's still testing their obedience.
It's all about. Because sometimes they have to fight. And then sometimes the Lord just does it. They don't have to do anything. Sometimes they suit up and get all ready for a party, and there's no party. It's over already. But then sometimes they have to stand their ground and fight. One of the things is they never know. They just have to be obedient whenever the Lord says. I mean, I always think about Gideon, goes through all this stuff, this massive, humongous thing that he has to do, and all these people. You're going to wait till we get to the story. It's awesome in Judges. And the Lord weeds the people, and he's go through all this, and they get all ready, 300 guys to take on this huge army, and they run out there, and then there's no fight. They're all turning around each other, killing each other. They just got to stand there. But he went through all of that just to see if they would. Okay? So, here, you'd think, oh, can't the Lord, I mean, you got a pillar of fire. He dealt with the Egyptians. They didn't have to fight them. Isn't that true? Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't the Lord just go to Amalek and or send the angel out for 1 second? Amalek's done. There's an angel with them, right? Isn't there? You think he could have done something about it? Mm-hmm. Of course he could have. But, no, the Lord wanted him to stand on the ground and fight. So, so Moses is to go up. Moses is, remember, in his 80s. Okay? He's not a soldier. He goes up the mountain on the mountaintop and he stretches out the staff. See, he's learned this time, right? He stretches out the staff. But there's an issue. As soon as he starts to do it, his soldiers just start to win, push them back. But there's a problem. His arms get tired. So, you know, imagine this 80-year-old man is holding the staff up. And what happens? You know, just try to hold your arm up for like 20 minutes. It's really hard. After 10, your arm starts to be like, no, man. Right? So you could see that you got to get the picture in your mind. The Lord, he had to hold the staff up. You think, well, why do you have to hold the staff up? Didn't the Lord just... See, you have to get that the Lord is always after the heart. It's not what people normally preach in these stories, but it's the main point of these stories. Moses is to be obedient. So if they're holding the staff, because you think of, well, he pulls the staff down, he starts to get tired, and he can't hold it up. So the staff, and all of a sudden, he probably sees some soldiers trying to get pushed back, right? He's looking down at this fight, and then I got to keep it up. So then he has Aaron and Hur, okay, are next to him, and they're like, what are we going to do? So they get a place for him to sit and to prop him up, because first of all, he's an old man. He's healthy and strong, but he's not spring chicken, right? And then they start grabbing it, and by the end of it, you have the three of them. Imagine the picture, all holding the staff up. Just imagine, though, being one of those soldiers down there fighting and looking and seeing that right up there. It's a pretty incredible sight, right? And of course, they destroy the Amalekites. I think part of this one was to give them some confidence and some experience and confidence. Wow, we were attacked. We're not soldiers, but we beat them, right? And they probably got some nice swords and weapons, too, that they probably needed. We don't think about that part of it, but it is part of the story. All right? And anyway, so they win, but it's the first time they were attacked. But the other main thing to remember about this story comes up now a couple of hundred years later in the Bible. That's why this one is one to remember, because what happens here is the Lord swears to Moses, and when the Lord swears something, guess what? That he will be at war with Amalek from generation to generation until he blots them off the face of the earth. You know what happens when the Lord blots you out? There's no memory of Amalek. There's no people group. We have no history. We don't know who they were or where they are. Right? They were truly blotted out. What's also interesting to know is everyone, when you go through the prophets the Lord said that about, it happened to. And then some of the nations were punished but were not blotted out. They're around. All right? But the ones where he said, you know, I will wipe your name from the earth. Guess what happened to their name? Gone. All right? So anyway, so what happens here is they beat the Amalekites, but the Lord says this and gives this to Moses, but it doesn't happen now. And what's interesting is that the Lord tells Moses, tell Joshua. Make sure Joshua hears this. He actually tells Moses specifically to make sure you tell Joshua that the Lord will at some point command Amalekites to be wiped out. It does happen. It happens in the book of Samuel. All right? And it's a couple of hundred years. And this prophecy lays dormant until one day the Lord says to Samuel, okay, take vengeance on Amalekites now. Time is now. And who has seen the movie, I know I'm using movies again, but there's actually a good movie on this. It's a tiny little part of the movie, but it's awesome how they do it. One Night with the King. This is in the movie. It starts out, you're thinking, aren't you talking about Esther and Persia? Well, actually, the movie starts out with Samuel and Saul, okay? And it's part of this, well, I'll tell you how they did it, but it starts out there because that was the time where the Lord told Samuel to take vengeance on the Amalekites. All right? So the movie starts out with Moses, with Samuel saying, "What is this bleating of sheep I hear in my ear?" And Saul goes, "Oh, I took the plunder and sacrificed to the Lord." And then Samuel says it's better to obey. You know, rebellion is a sin of divination. Blah blah blah. And then they show this one woman escaping, then who's pregnant, and that ends up being, because it does say Haman the Agagite, and Agag was the king, right, who they let live, and then Samuel actually kills him and says, "Your sword has made men childless, but the Lord has determined," right? Anyway, that's in Samuel. So that's how the movie starts. And it also explains the backstory of Haman, which actually has a lot of validity to it. Anyway, so if you see, they managed to get that story into that movie, and that was really cool. That was probably the coolest part of the movie. But it's interesting that story comes about, okay, hundreds of years later with Samuel, and then of course it comes back again in Esther 1,000 years later. Isn't that interesting? Okay? But all from this part, where the Lord, Amalek has done this, and now there's other armies that attack Israel and things happen, but the Lord didn't say, "I'm going to blot you out." What Amalek did was so distasteful to the Lord that, but it's interesting that he gave him a couple of hundred years for Israel to be established. And then he says, do it. Now is the time. So they got a couple hundred years after this prophecy until it was fulfilled. All right? But anyway, they eventually do receive that judgment. Okay. So moving on. Then we have, after they beat the Amalekites in the Amalekite war, then we have Jethro. Jethro comes in for a visit. Now, why is this again important is because it also gives us of where it is. Where did Moses flee to? Midian. Midian is modern day Saudi Arabia. It's where the Ishmaelites really rooted and grounded and thrived. Okay? And why is he coming to visit? Because they're getting close to where they were. Because he was supposed to come back and worship me on this mountain. Everybody remember that? On the burning bush. You're going to come back and worship me where? In the Sinai Peninsula? On this mountain. Right? So Jethro comes and meets them, and anyway, Moses receives him, but of course you notice that his children, Moses' children, are half Midianite. Right? His two sons and his wife is not a son of Israel, or a daughter of Israel, I should say. Okay? He gets some flack for it later. That's why it's important, because Miriam and Aaron, we're going to get to that story in Numbers, actually chirp about it some. And the Lord deals with them. Okay? And especially since the Lord puts it through Moses for the Levites for their law to have to marry children of Israel. But of course that was before the commandment. And the other thing too, though, is interesting, is that Jethro has some understanding, not complete truth, but has some truth. Kind of reminds me of like the woman at the well, where, we worship on this mountain, but you Jews say we have to worship in Jerusalem. And Jesus say, woman, okay, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews, and explains it to them, blah, blah, blah. But they had some understanding because that our father Jacob worshipped on this mountain. Right? Well, many believe that Jethro, is being a Midianite, very much could have been a descendant of Abraham at some point. All right? And some understanding of the Creator. And you see that he has that here. Right? But also, of course, is greater than any other God, because they don't have truth. But anyway, it's interesting. But Jethro actually gives him great counsel, good enough to show up a couple times here and be respected. Now, what is his counsel? His counsel is simple. Moses is trying to be a one-man army here. There's no way he can handle all of this. And no one seems to want to help him. They'd rather just have Moses do it all. But it also shows Moses' heart. Moses has been given all this authority and all this, and what does he do? Instead of lording it over them and acting like a king, he sits there and serves them all day long. That's what he does. He's being abused, actually. Right? So Jethro comes and he sees his wife and his children. They were with him when he originally came down. Somehow they obviously went back, and we don't actually get the details of that part of the story, honestly. But he respects him, and but then he sees Moses' regular practice as he sits there every morning, and all the people come to him with all their problems, and Moses has to hear from God and tell them what to do and to sort it out. That is not a fun job. And that's what he does every day. Okay? So Jethro sees this and then says, listen, you can't do this. And you'd expect him to, what's interesting is the Lord completely backed up what Jethro said. The Lord didn't say, was going to say to Moses, you can't do all this by yourself. But Jethro's advice, and Moses had to come to that conclusion on his own. I can't do all this by myself. Right? So anyway, he says to him, you can't handle all this by yourself. You're just going to wear yourself out. There's no possible way. You need help. You need others to make judgments, and you deal with the big cases. You got the local court and the Supreme Court. All right, Moses is holding the Supreme Court. So Moses listens. You're right. And of course, like I told you, it's not chronological. We also get in, I believe it's in Numbers, we get the some more detail into this story as well. Okay? Which we don't get as much detail here. But then, of course, you have verse 11, 18, where Jethro declares, "Now I know that the Lord," which he's saying is, I know that Yahweh, right, is greater than all the gods. Indeed, it was proven when they dealt proudly against the people. So I always mention that to show you the mindset. They see, monotheism comes from Abraham down. Now, again, they do have the understanding, though. See, we kind of think as Christians, we have this idea, there's only the Lord and there's the devil. Now, the Lord is the creator. There's only one creator. But there is other, small g, you could say gods. Meaning not human and more powerful than us. Right? We're told that in Scripture. Actually, the word Paul uses, the word principality, well, in English translated to the word principality. It's not the word Paul used since he was writing in Greek. But the point is that, which is a powerful demonic angel or being. And why that's important, I know that, does that really matter? Well, you have to understand, there is these demonic forces and things that they're worshiping. When fallen angels came in Genesis 6, they were worshipped. Right? You couldn't necessarily say that they were making it up, were they? Because they were powerful angels. Yeah. All right? But they're not worshiping the Creator. Created things. They're created things. All right? And I just show you that to kind of get the mindset. See, what the Lord is establishing through Abraham's descendants and now through Israel, through the sons of Israel, is that the Lord, Yahweh, is the Creator. You know, who the beginning and the end. Ultimate authority. He is alone is the Lord. Right? Now you have that understanding already. You're saying, of course, that's basic knowledge. But we're building that knowledge now. But I want you to see how the other people groups, their mindset. Alright? Now Israel has to have this mindset too. They have to be taught that. Because they knew that there was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But the Egyptians have their gods. And the, Amalekites have their gods. And they all have theirs. And they have to get, the Lord reveals himself that he is the beginning. I am that I am. He is the beginning and the end. Right? He is the creator. He is the God of Adam and Eve and Noah. He is the ultimate authority. Right? Anyway, but that's all being established now through Israel. Okay? And aren't you glad he established that? I certainly am.
Amen.
So Jethro counsels, but why I said that, let me give you a little backstory that goes with this. You're wondering, why did you have to explain such a basic thing to us? We all get that. Well, I was watching a History Channel special, probably 5-6 years ago. And it was this PH, triple D with the BS on there who said, what he said is, well, they're so ignorant. Christians don't even realize that Moses was not monotheistic. And I'm sitting there going, everybody knows a monotheism, right? One God. Okay? Hear, O Lord, the Lord our God is one. Okay? So the point is, and I'm sitting there going, how can this guy possibly say that? And he takes a couple passages out of context. Well, see, this is the key. Why I explain that so thoroughly is because I watched that special. So you understand how to deal with those passages. If you heard some crazy person say that, you know how to handle it. Because, truthfully, see, the world doesn't get that either. They just, Christians talking about the God and the devil. Well, yes, there's the ultimate authority, the lying, thieving, allowed to exist authority, right? But there is in the middle. Angels are certainly ministering spirits and powerful beings, aren't they? Yeah. Are angels around? Do they do things? Yeah. We're going to see one when we get to David that is so large that his head is in heaven and his feet are on earth. That's a big angel. Yeah. Okay? So, but you get my point that there is, when you hear that term, so you get it, so you're not stuck in that mindset. All right? Islam, Allah. You're all wondering what I'm going to say. Oh, I got your attention. For the good or the bad, I got your attention. That's good. Anyway, you talk about principality and power. Well, let me bring you to Daniel. Allah is not Yahweh, by the way. And when you hear that, your skin should, and you should have your hair in the back of your head stand up when you hear that. Please, I hope you do. If you've been through this class and you haven't gotten that, maybe you should go back to week 1. Okay? But the point is, why would I say that? Well, think about Daniel. Some of you know the story, but you guys went through Daniel already, so I can use Daniel because you went through it in eschatology, right? Yeah. So you already read it this year. Well, Daniel came up against, was there the prince of Persia? Sure. Right? Mm-hmm. And Michael the prince had to fight the prince of Persia to get the message from Gabriel, right? Well, who's the prince of Persia? I already went to explain the enemy. I went to, the prophets where they call out powerful, the enemy plus other powerful principalities and angels. And that's the word, the English word, the Christianese word that we use is the term principality. We get it from the New Testament, from Paul's words. Okay? Principalities and powers, or what it is created powerful beings. Why does that matter? Why did I bring up Allah? Well, there is a spirit that they're worshiping. See, it's not fantasy. So we kind of think it's all just totally fantasy. Well, of course, the idols and all of that, they're nothing, But the point is, there is a spirit. Now, when we get to Elijah and we get to Baal, which is going to be around all the time, I'll make the connection between Baal and Allah. It's in the same area and there's a lot of the same practices. Okay? But see, it's a power. And then, of course, you have Beelzebub, which we think is Satan. But they had that understanding that was actually the Lord of the Flies. It could have been a powerful, wicked principality as well. In the New Testament, they call Jesus, well, he cast them out by the power of Beelzebub. That word he's really linking it to was the word Baal. I'm probably getting a little too deep for some of you, but you'll understand this stuff later. Your knowledge base is growing. It's making, right? It's slow, but it is. And you're starting to get more and more, and you'll find you'll constantly get more and more. But I want you to see that you can see how it's not necessarily inaccurate. Because Paul said, truly there is many gods and many lords, didn't he? That's a New Testament quote. People have used that. They don't get what Paul's saying. He's talking about, powers, wicked powers, and fallen angels, and demons, and worshiping demons. He says doctrines of demons. Demons teach doctrines, and they can be worshipped. All right? And plus, he was also using the term for men put in those kind of positions. There certainly is. A king rules with an iron fist over millions of people. He certainly is almost like a god for the wrong, for evil. But still, he has that kind of power, right? So does everybody get my point? Did I make this point? So when you trip over, you're not going to trip over those passages. And if you ever hear someone saying that Moses wasn't monotheistic, you'll understand what the heck they're talking about. Right? Monotheism does not mean that there is only the Lord and there's no other. We worship the Lord and no other. He is the creator, he is the almighty, he is the all-powerful. All other are created beings. Right? And 1/3 rebelled against him, remember? Right? So, of course, we have one Lord, one God, one creator, one power. But there is other forces, which he will eventually throw them in the lake of fire. Read at the end. Some of them have been locked up in prison, are going to be let out. They're real. They're going to be let out for 3.5 years to cause problems. I think they might. And then there's death. It's the last one. But it seems to be a being of death. Even. I'm just throwing it out there, but you look at there's, and then of course we have the ultimate, the enemy. I'm just trying to simply make the point so you can deal with these. See, a lot of times we just skip right over these things. Right. And we don't need to mention them. They're never mentioned. No one deals with them. No one says anything. But then you're watching the History Channel and you hear some person talk like that and you don't know how to defend yourself and you don't know how to explain it. Right? Someone quotes for what Jethro just quoted right here while he's meeting with Moses. Oh, Moses, they weren't monotheistic. See that? And then what would you say? Oh my gosh, the Bible's not true. Right? So you see how important it is to be equipped with this stuff? No? Anyway, so that is something, now we're going to deal with that a lot. That's something that we're going to deal with too when we get into the book of Judges and we get to the fall and they fall away and they have this mishmash of Yahweh with all this other stuff mixed in it. You know, you can kind of you can have more understanding for that. All right? Okay. So Jethro meets, Moses listens to his advice, and we get more details into this when we're in Numbers. Okay. Verse 21, this is advice of 18. Furthermore, you shall select out of the people able men who fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and tens. Okay? And he sets up a judicial system and local authority. When you're dealing with 1 million people. Okay? You need that. And of course, then the Lord, we know, anoints the 70 elders when you put the other ones together. And that, of course, brings us to Sinai. Okay, now, so let's go to 19. Now, this is obviously one of the most important portions of all Scripture. The next couple of chapters are some of the most important and foundational verses for the whole Bible. Okay? The Lord is revealing himself to Israel. Verse 5. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice. No, let's go back to verse 3. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice, and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, and ye shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. A separate nation, taken out of the nations. Understand? These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. So Moses came out and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words which the Lord had commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, All that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. Verse 9, And the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I shall come to you in a thick cloud, in order that the people may hear when I speak with you, may also believe in you forever. Then Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. So the Lord wants to actually speak directly to the people. From this point on, the Lord has only spoken to Moses. All right? But he wants to now speak to the entire congregation to hear his voice. Literally. All right? Then the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people and consecrate. Now this is actually the beginning of baptism. This is the foundation of where baptism came from. Let's read it. Lord said to Moses, Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and let them be ready for the third day. From the third day, consecrate also means washing, cleansing yourself, and separating yourself. All right? Third day, the Lord will come down to Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people, and you shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, Beware that you not go up on the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be surely put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, and they shall come up to the mountain. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people, and consecrated the people, and they washed their garments. And he said to the people, Be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman. If you have an NIV, it says abstain from sexual relations. That also comes up in the New Testament. Paul says the only time is for consecration and prayer and fasting, and then come back together. And what is that? You're wondering, why is that in there? Well, it's about separating themselves, men and women, to give themselves to the Lord and prepare their hearts for the Lord. Actually, it's about the Lord wanting each and every heart personally. All right? And giving them, setting aside a time to give themselves to Him. All right? That's what this is all about. This is a marriage covenant. We're going to get into it. Okay? And of course, that's why it comes up here. And of course, it comes up again when Paul mentions it, getting the teaching from here of having the only time to abstain, right? is through prayer and fasting, which, hey, it's in there. So what are you going to do? Take that as you want. Deal with the Lord on that subject, but anyway, it's there. So, I've had a question on this, but I've had a question on everything. I've sat in classes, so many of these classes. Now on video, I don't get it as much anymore, but we used to have these small classes, and I had people ask, and I was usually, 7 women and 2 guys. And women can ask them questions, let me tell you. And they always pay attention to stuff like this. And I always get a question about it. All right? So I have dealt with all the tough ones. Anyway, so that's where that came from, and that's why it's not that the Lord says, no, you can't, be intimate because you're going to meet with God, and like that's evil or something. Some people draw out of this, like having marital relations, I'll say it that way, is wrong, is evil, it's the sinfulness of man, but the Lord... See, they dig these kind of theories out of there. That is not the point.
Just wants our undivided attention.
Yes, and Paul makes the clear point in the New Testament that it's about taking a time to separate and completely give yourself to the Lord. Mm-hmm. Right? That's what it's about. Okay. So this is the foundation of oh, it's 9:30. Hey, look at that. Well, no, give me one more minute and we'll end. This is the foundation of baptism. Okay? And I'll get into that next week. We'll pick it up here now. We're going to start getting into the law. We're going to get into the 10 Commandments. I'm going to spend a lot of time on that. The foundation of the law, the needs for the law, what the law is, all of that. Then we're going to get into some of the sundry laws and the personal laws. But I'm not going to be going verse by verse. I'm going to be more dealing with the main subjects and the reason, the need, and God's heart in them. Okay? That's what I'm really going to be spending time on. And we'll pick it up right there with the consecration and the foundation of baptism into the 10 Commandments next week. So where did I have you read to?
30.
Read to 35. Okay? Always try to stay ahead of me. So, okay. I will see you all next week. Have a good night.